Elementary School located at Dunn and Monterey. And my connection with this school, I started working here in 1957 as a school secretary. In the same office, in the front office, I was here for 27 years. I retired in 1985, and I have certainly seen a lot of changes in those times. When I first started, I only started working with the PTA, and then they called it the Mothers Club, and it was quite different then because most of the children that came here, their parents were farmers. And every year we'd have a school carnival, and everybody attended, and that's how we made our money to buy extra library books and all those sort of things that weren't furnished for us that we could get. And we always had, we used to have our own kitchen here. They did their cooking down in the cafeteria, a little kitchen, and then they served in the cafeteria, and then later it went to satellite lunches, and which they were done at the high school and then brought over for our children. And we had kindergarten through 8th grade when I first came, and then it changed. We only had kindergarten through the 6th grade. And during all those years that I worked here, I've worked for 12 different principals. I'm not sure you want all their names, but I have worked for 12 different principals and several teachers that I still keep in contact with all those years. And we felt like Morgan Hill School was kind of just a little family thing, because we were all very close, and when one had to leave, it was kind of sad because we felt very bad when they had to leave because we were kind of a close family. And as I said, I've seen a lot of change, and it made me really sad when they decided to not use the school anymore, and then kind of stopped maintaining it. And actually, the earthquake, when we had the bad earthquake, actually that did not do too much to this school. I know some people thought it did, but it didn't. Most of the damage on this school was done from water because of the drains on the top would plug with the leaves from the trees, and then they would, the water would just come down through and wreck the walls. And at one time there was water down the hallway where we couldn't even go to the cafeteria for lunch because there was so much water in here. But actually for the earthquake, there was not that much damage. Very little damage to this school during that earthquake.
What year was that?
Let me think. That was, I can't be. And as I said, I feel really bad that they didn't keep it. And we used to have substitute teachers that would come from other towns, and they loved the school because of the windows. Because most of your new schools now, they do not have windows. You know, they're all lighted inside. But they loved coming here because they liked the windows. They could see out, and they thought that was kind of neat because of this school.
What was it like in the time, during the years when you were here? You were talking before about the heating system.
Yes, we do have the boiler downstairs. There's the old-fashioned boiler downstairs, and that's how we were heated. Because and then the radiators in the classrooms, they'd have to take thing off the radiator and let the steam come out. And then when the steam came out, I'd go back and put the tops back on, and it would heat up the buildings. But that's how they were heated, and we didn't have carpeting in the rooms for a long time. It was just wood floors. And I know the custodians, they kind of liked it because Sam Moore was the first custodian when I was here, and he would come after school. After the classes was out, he would come over and he would do all the classrooms all by himself. He'd move the chairs, the students' desk to one side, and he'd sweep, and then he'd put them back. And then when they put the carpet in with he used the vacuum cleaners, he wasn't real thrilled about that because he thought it was kind of neat because it kept down the noise, but he kind of liked the wood floors, to keep the wood floors up. And he would be the one sometimes the radiator down, the old furnace downstairs would not work, and he'd go and give it a kick in the mornings to start it. And that was kind of unusual, but as I said, lots of memories in this old school, Morgan Hill School.
What comes to mind? You say there's lots of memories. What comes to mind is, a prominent memory? You were here a long time.
Yes, I was
there
here.
Must be something that's
I was
standing out
here
that
for a long
happened to you.
time, and I guess just the memories that I have is just all the students. But then I felt like, as the years went by, when some of the students that started here in kindergarten started bringing their own children in to register for kindergarten, I thought, oh, maybe it's time Mrs. Metcalf leaves on. But
what were some of those names of those students that come to mind to you?
the Bondys, I'm trying to think of some of them that.
Or some of the teachers?
Mrs. Thomas, the kindergarten teacher, Gertrude Thomas. She's just such a lovely person, and one of the memories I have of her, sometimes she would have, every morning she'd have 30 students, and then she'd have 30 more students in the afternoon. But sometime when she had parent conferences, she had all 60 students in her classroom. And I remember we had an assistant principal, and he came and he said there'd be no way she could handle 60 children. And I said, you go down to the room and just watch her and see what she does. And she did a lot of neat things with the children. She had music that she'd play, and they knew that it was time to take their mats and go down and take a nap. And then one really cute thing she did, she took a white sheet and had it on the floor. And then at that time, that was when those popcorn poppers popped. You could open, they'd pop. Well, she'd put that in the middle of this sheet, and the children would sit around it, and she'd pop the popcorn, and whatever come to them, they got to eat off this sheet. It was the neatest thing. She was one of the neatest teachers that I've ever known. Then we had Mrs. Cleveland, Mrs. Call, Mrs. Clouser, Dorothy Clouser. She taught here a number of years. Miss McKernan, Bill Forrester, Dottie Cadwallader. I could just name all kinds of teachers because memories, but the ones that were, when I first came, was the ones like Mrs. Rice and Mrs. Clouser and Mrs. McKernan, Mrs. Cole. And
Who was your favorite principal?
well, I had a lot of favorites. Bob Pedretti was sort of not the last principal, but he was a neat one. Had Jim McDonald, Ed Belay, Bill Forster, Ben Sassnet, Joanne Denbo. But my first principal was Ed Belay, and then Robert Rice. Gosh, I don't think I really had a favorite. This room. We had all of our nurses' supplies in here, and we had a little bed back here. This was the nurses' room.
The old ditto machine.
That's the old ditto machine that I use for
Sold it.
forever. The old ditto machine, and I mean, you'd have ink all over you when you got through with it, but at least it made copies. And this was our teacher supply room. This is where we kept all the teachers' supplies. And we'd usually check them out, you know. Beautiful wood. Some of this wood is just gorgeous. I can see if it could be preserved. Oh, the courtyard is so sad. And this is just a typical class, one of the typical classrooms. This was one of the 4th grade rooms. Every room had a clock, and for a long time we had no way of, no communication between the rooms. If I needed to take a note to one of the classrooms, I had to take the note. But then eventually we got a clock that had bells, and each room had a bell, and you could ring the bell, and the teacher would send a student in to get the message.
And I came here in the 6th grade. It was the only school year that I had on double sessions. There was no overcrowding problem at the time, so I came in the afternoon to this school. I was in room 4, which is down the hall. I had Mr. Kelly, he was my teacher, and I shared a desk with a boy I never met who was in the morning session. His name was Clay.
So Clay was a neat name.
Oh, Clay was very neat. His side of the desk was awesome. And then there was my side of the desk, which was probably less than perfect, and really I wasn't sorry to never meet Clay. I'm sure he didn't want to meet me. He probably would have had a thing or two to say. But it was a good school year here. I was in the afternoon session, so I came in, it was about 12:15 or so, and by the time we got home from the bus in the wintertime, it was dark. So we got off a little after 4, and by the time we got home, it was like 5:30. It was a full day.
And you mentioned that you were involved in various activities here, like theater, I think you said?
Oh, yes, I did my first play here. The play was called Penelope in the Pickle Factory, and I got the lead. I was Penelope. And I was really very shy in school. The only reason that I did that was because Steve Beck was the male lead, and I had such a crush on him. So that's why I did it. And actually, we became a little item for, gosh, I want to say about 2 months, which is an eternity in 6th grade. But that is the only reason that I got involved in the play. But yes, I still have the apron that I wore as Penelope in the Pickle Factory in the auditorium here.
And that's some of the memories you mentioned about the schoolyard and the bars and...
Oh yeah, I learned how to twirl on the bars. I'm not very coordinated, not at all. So I wanted to learn how to twirl all the way around, but it's with both your feet in front of you, not one leg hooked around the bars. And there was one girl here who could do that, and that was Mary Matuk. She was awesome. She was my hero. And it took me all year, but I really did learn how to twirl on the bars. In fact, when I came here, I went looking for the bars, but they're gone. In fact, that's even why all of us used to pack our lunches, because if you packed your lunch, you were closer to the bar. So as soon as you got done, you could run over and get your spot on the bar. So, yes, I became quite the little athlete. I bet I could twirl to this day. I think I could. I learned it here.
What did it feel like to be here at that time? Can you remember?
The school seemed so much bigger. It was a good year. I remember when it rained, we would all go into the auditorium. And it's really funny because that's like no place to get out of the rain.
What year was this again?
This was in 72, 73. And we would all go, and like I said, we were on double sessions, so we weren't particularly overcrowded in the auditorium, but there'd be different sections that had buckets. And it would be raining really in there. You know, if you were in a bad spot, you might catch some overflow. But, and so I remember we caught the bus right out there, and our bus was late, so we'd have to wait for about 20 minutes, which is good. It gave me that extra twirling practice that I really needed. And our whole neighborhood was all in the afternoon session, so that was pretty good. So we knew all the kids very well.
What were the names of some of the kids that were in the class?
Jane Perryman, she was Jane Danielson. She was my next door neighbor, and she's the one that we recited our first poem here in this school. We recited The Smuggler Song by Rudyard Kipling. It is a really, really, really long poem.
You remember your part?
I remember the first part.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us what it was?
Oh, yeah, okay. If you wake up midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blinds or looking in the street. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. And watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. And it's about 20 pages after that. It's a pretty long poem. And I remember every other verse.
Because your partner.
Because my partner knew the other half. And we were scared to death. But it was a good experience for us.
That's great. Do you know that the school building is going to be moved to another location? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in looking at the school today, it is vastly different from how I remember. I remember it being kind of run down. I mean, it was an old building then, and it's very old now. And I would imagine the expense to keep it at all is probably fairly significant. But I don't think you can replace some of the memories that are here. And I was here for 1 year, and if I have those kind of memories, there are people here that, this has really touched their lives, and I think it's nice that the city's making an opportunity to retain part of its history here. I really do.
My name is George Thomas Jr. I was a student at the Morgan Hill School from 1954 to 1958. I was here in the first grade in 1954. That would be with a teacher by the name of Mrs. Myers. And then I was here in the second grade with Mrs. Clauser. I was here in the third grade with Mrs. Culp. And the fourth grade was with Bonnie Simonson.
Which one do you like the best?
Good memory.
Well, the most interesting one, I think, was Bonnie Simonson, who's still in the community. Her name was Alkire, and her family was the Pete Johnson Funeral Home. She was a Johnson. And she taught just 1 year, and that was our fourth grade class. And she got married that year to Mr. Simonson, who has the rat lab here and mouse lab in Morgan Hill and Gilroy. It was a big deal for our class because she was excited and she was going on a boat trip. So we all kind of lived her premarital year with her about getting ready to get married, because I believe Mr. Alkire had been killed in the war, World War II, or died right after the war, and she'd been a widow and single for some time. So it was an exciting event for us as a class to go through that. And the especially nice thing for me today is they're still close friends of mine at this point in life. So that part's nice. They have stayed around the community, but she just taught that 1 year here, and that was it. Mr. Rice, who was the principal, was my best friend's father. He, I think, was the principal the full time I was here. He was a gentleman, but also could be very stern and I remember a number of people going to his office, and I think they received corporal punishment, unlike today. Mrs. Culp, third grade teacher right over here, was big on corporal punishment. She would use a yardstick to hit kids' knuckles and things like that. And
Did you ever get in trouble?
no, my
yourself?
mom was in the schools and over at the high school, so I had to behave because all these people talked, so I didn't get in trouble, but I was near people who did. And they also use these cloakrooms that are in here a lot to punish children, then make them go stand in the back of the classroom, but it's a separate little room in the building, so that's called a cloakroom, and they would send them out there for 10 or 15 minutes to stand back there for discipline. What strikes me is more what was going around the school at that time. The only Catholic church, St. Catherine's, was across the street here at the corner of down in Monterey, where this new shopping center is. And the church hall was added, I believe, about the time we were here, and it's still there, but the church is gone. St. Catherine's, as Elena Moreno here can tell you, was a very elaborate building and a beautiful building that was across the street. Elena Moreno has just entered. She was my kindergarten teacher, but it was not here. It was at Burnett. So we went to Burnett, most of the class that came here, and then we moved over here. And I think I can't remember if she came or not, because the kindergarten teacher here was Mrs. Thomas, who stayed for many years in this new addition out on the back. Like I say, what was going on around the school was interesting because the Catholic Church was over there and had a lot of activities. And then across the street over here was an auto dealership, well, at least auto repair shop and B&M Automotives and things where the bank is now. And a lot of us, including Mrs. Moreno's children and myself, would walk home from here after school. And we had a lot more fun walking home than we did at school. I remember that a lot more. We'd buy candy bars at Stoops for 5 cents over there where they had the grocery store.
Sounds like Morgan Hill was quite different than...
Very different. We used to walk under this tunnel where the creek is here. We'd walk under the highway and then we'd walk up. So most of us walked, and there wasn't any fear of somebody abducting us off the highway or anything like that. It was very open. And we had a lot of fun because we all then went from here all the way through high school together. She had twins, Kim and Kenny Moreno and Paul Rice, and a number of us that had been in kindergarten together up at Burnett came down here, and then we went to P.A. Walsh in 5th grade. Most of us had Miss Candy, and then we went from there on to the high school. So we went all the way through these things together. So my memories center more around the people than this place, but the place was really wonderful because I think these windows here, letting in so much light and such, made it a joyful place to be. Like the young woman that was just here said, it seemed so quiet because the halls were very loud, and particularly during rainstorms and such, we'd be inside here. And it was very vibrant and kind of, a very joyful place to be. I mean, we look forward to coming to school. And even after I moved out in the country 3 or 4 miles, I would ride my bike to school on Rick Shelton, and I would ride up, and the Guglielmos out here, we would meet up sometimes and ride our bikes down here to the school. And a lot of kids can't do that now, so we were lucky we could do that and ride home.
Any outstanding, special memories, unusual things that happened?
I don't remember anything that unusual. I remember some plays, I think, in here in the stage. I remember we would use that, and when it was raining, we'd stay inside and use the stage in there. I remember this was always the office area over here to the left where you come in on the north side of the school. I think that, and there was as I recall, there was a cafeteria here. I usually brought my lunch, but I think they used that kitchen on the other side of the building to make food for kids that wanted to purchase it here at the school.
Well, you've been involved, you know that the building is going to be moved.
Yes.
And that's partly why we're doing this right now.
Yes.
And you've been involved in this process, and so what are your thoughts of the fact that it's going to be moved and of the new use that we'll have as a private school?
At first, as a person living in the community, I didn't think it probably was worth the effort to move it because it would be expensive, and I wasn't sure. But as I've been part of the process, I'm very glad they're saving it because I think it will be a wonderful school again for
You
the
want to say
private
what your
school.
role is?
Yeah, my role was in assisting in negotiating the move, representing the private school that will use the building. And they're very excited about it. They have fallen in love with the building, and they're very enthused about it. They are using a public school building up in Campbell now for their other facility,
This is the Cardin Academy.
the Cardin Academy, and they like the buildings that are designed for the public schools because they can't afford to build such a nice facility, and it's very difficult to find good facilities for private schools. And so it is nice. They like the high ceilings, they like the blackboards and the older feel. They will have smaller classes than what we probably had. I think we had classes that were probably approaching 30 or 35. Yeah, 36 or so. Whereas their classes are only going to be maybe 15 to 20, although they thought eventually they could fill up these spaces for their classes as well, even though they're a private school. They liked also the indoor halls. Some of the things that we liked as kids, they enjoy the idea that you would be protected from the rain and such. I think that's one of the disadvantages of the schools today is they don't have safe, dry places for kids to walk when it is storming and raining. You know, the high school particularly is bad. And the design of a lot of the other schools, the kids have to get from one building to another in the rain. So that was one nice thing about this is that we could stay dry. I think it also helped with the utilities because you have the indoor hall and it probably keeps the building warmer. And it was, I remember it was always very comfortable to be in here even though we had these single pane windows. And there was always plenty of fresh air. And we usually would have, I can't remember here so much, but we'd have like a window monitor whose job was for that day. And I think it usually was a reward, but for that day, they got to kind of man the windows and watch, open and close the windows, make sure they closed at night. We'd always start out with a flag salute, and I believe the flag was up in the corner of each room, as I recall. And I remember these big blackboards were like what we're seeing here, the full width of the room. And the teacher's voice carried very well in here. It wasn't like, even though the room has a high ceiling that you could never hear. I think we were normal spacing. We're 36 people, but I don't recall anyone ever having a problem hearing, even though the ceiling is probably 15 feet high.
Well, I'm Elena Moreno. This school, Morgan Hill Elementary, was my first assignment straight out of college. In those days, my name was Ellen Oberg, very Scandinavian, but I married this fellow whose family came from Spain, so I've been Elena Moreno since. I feel today as if I'm just walking in on my first student teaching assignment. Not true, I taught at a school in San Jose for 6 weeks and then I was assigned here. And then when I graduated, that was 1943, so this building was new and sparkling, very attractive. Then in 1944, when I graduated, they offered me a job here. And I think that I'm very fortunate because I have never, ever in my long career had to apply for a job. They always said, we have a spot for you. Would you like to do this or would you like to do that? So I started out with second grade and I walked to school from the north end of town. And as I walked south on Monterey, I felt like the Pied Piper because students came in from side roads all along and we all walked together. And by the time we got to school, rain or shine, we had quite a group of all ages because this was a school from kindergarten through 8th grade. What should I see next? I think I should do some name dropping about the people who were important here at that time. Mr. Robert Rice was the principal in 1944. Soon after that, he was drafted because World War II was in high gear. We had many shortages, no gasoline, that's why I walked. And Rather than being drafted into the Army, our principal went off and joined the Marines. And so a woman principal took over, and her name was Emma Ritchie. She was very thorough and very stern, and I must confess I was scared to death of her, but we got along very well, and she was an excellent educator. I really respect her. Another teacher of the time would be Lucille Tenacio, who had lived in Morgan Hill, a dear person whom everybody loved. And she was at that time a teacher who came from San Martin to work in Morgan Hill School. But in time, as I went on, being just an ordinary teacher, Lucille became a supervisor. And I'm saying these names because I know there are lots of people out there in Morgan Hill yet, particularly on the ranches, if any are left, who attended Morgan Hill School during the years of World War II and after. And they would know all these people. Another was a kindergarten teacher named Lonnie Thomas, and her name was really Leilani because she was from Hawaii. And I was the baby of the faculty. Everyone else seemed quite mature, like the age of my mother.
How was your, what kind of curriculum did you have, or did you adjust your curriculum to what was happening in the world with the war? What kinds of things did you teach children?
In second grade, we didn't dwell much on international affairs, but they surely knew a war was going on because their parents and their relatives were all affected. And people we knew were dying all the time. The death notices just came thick and fast. And if you read that monument down in Monterey Street, I know all of the names, knew the people on the World War II monument, and then my children, a generation later, knew all of the people who died, the kids who died in the Vietnam War. They were lucky to escape, truly. Well, I was just advised that telling a funny story might be a good thing at this time. So I remembered when I came to visit the school on one day a few years ago when they had a school cleanup. Do you know about that? Interested people who'd gone to school here came back and slept and actually scraped the crud out of the building, but they never took down those awful curtains in my room, which are hanging in gray shreds and look just terrible. But as I walked down the hall to my room, I remembered a crisis that I had one day in my classroom. There was much sniggering going on in a certain area, and I knew there was mischief afoot, but I couldn't see who was producing it until a little boy's face got very, very red. And I said, okay, you come here. I didn't know, I wanted to get him out of the room and away from his audience because it was plainly show-off stuff. And I stepped outside the door and I said, what's the matter? And he wouldn't tell me. And someone inside the classroom said, he's got a crayon stuck up his nose. I was horrified because nothing at San Jose State in teacher training ever prepared me for that. So I looked, and sure enough, there was a crayon in there, and it was red, and it was thick. And he had apparently rubbed it and tried to extract it, and so he had made it worse. Well, there was no 911 to call in those days. So I just did what came naturally, and I got a hold of his nose on one side and held his head, and I said, blow. And he did, and a red crayon went right over and hit the baseboard on the corridor. And I was
Out your fondest single memory of your time teaching here?
Well, it was happiness throughout. I was really joyful here. I liked walking to school every day. I liked walking home at night. My husband worked in San Jose and had the car. We didn't have 2 or 3 car families in those days. And later, he was a young policeman, and in fact, quite soon. And he always stationed himself out here when kids were crossing the highway. Imagine crossing Monterey Highway with semi-trucks and buses, Greyhound buses and everything to get to school. So he was always parked out there, and I believe in the beginning he stood in the street himself, But soon after that, they realized they had to hire adults, because they always sent 7th and 8th grade boys out there to cross the kids on the highway, and I thought that was very risky. So I was glad when he was around, and he split his time between elementary school and the high school, which is Britain, at those particular times of the day. There were so many things we had to deal with. I hate to say things. Do without, for instance. Today you have copy machines. Oh, if we'd only had a copier there, we could have taught so much better. But there was some awful instrument out here in the hallway that sat on a table. It was called a hectograph or something. And it had a gelatin type roll on it. You're too young to remember that.
I saw it up there.
And we had to work with some indelible purple ink to make a master copy, which we laid on that, took it off, and then we could press out by hand every sheet of paper, press it out, take it off. We could make about 24 copies, and after that they got very dim. But there were about 36 kids in every class. And I must tell you that after World War II, when these servicemen who had been in California and realized what a gorgeous place this is, they wanted to come here where there was no snow in winter. And so there was a great surge in people from snow country coming to live in California, or soldiers who had married local girls who came here. And so the school population began to burgeon and burgeon. And the school board didn't know what to do about it, really. They just watched it and wondered what would happen. Would it ever level off? And there actually came a time when I, in 2nd grade, had 57 second graders in that room. Mrs. Allward, in 4th grade, had 59. And other classes had enormous classes too, but those two were the extremes that, I guess, broke the camel's back, and that's when the school board decided to carve up the auditorium into smaller classrooms. And a year or two later, they went on this extremely new idea, like year-round school was to us some time back. They went on double sessions. So I taught 2nd grade full-time for 3 years. Stayed out a year to have another child, and it was double. And so I stayed home a year with the twins, and then came back to teach afternoon 2nd grade, because there was another 2nd grade teacher there in the morning. And all the lower grades then became double. And that's why they had to build P.A. Walsh School very fast. It's interesting to know that every single school had its own private personal school board. And those were all elected officials, you know, who went through a trying election and weren't about to give up their positions easily. But along came this idea of unifying Morgan Hill School with all of the country schools way out there. And they were far away. There was a little Yaga school way out there, and a Yuva school way up there. And they had to pull in San Martin. Do you think the board members in San Martin wanted to go through another election? Because then the unification, which took 2 elections to pass anyway to make the Morgan Hill School District, there had to be another general election in order to get one school board for all of those schools. And of course, they all wanted to be represented. So it was sort of a trying time. Actually, there was a very good friend, Dr. Nicholson, who was the high school principal, who went through those trying elections, and soon after that he had a heart attack and died. And he always felt that it really was a repercussion of a political situation at that time.
You know, every teacher, seems like it during the years, I'm sure has a teacher's pet or 2 or 3 or 4. Can you name some of yours?
Well, I tried to be fair. truthfully.
Well, it's many years ago.
I'll tell you whom I might have been fondest of because they needed me most. And those were the Mexican-American children. To me, they were just beautiful. And I used to draw my children. I used to take a black crayon for lack of charcoal and just draw their faces on rainy days, recesses, or sometimes noontime. And I just enjoyed drawing those little girls and boys with the enormous dark eyes and black hair. And many of them were, well, some are doing quite well, but not the way they are today. They scarcely own their own school. Yes, I do.
For the youth, for the new home of the Cardinal Academy.
Yes, I'm very sentimental about the place. You can tell I nearly cry when I drive by. And I wanted something good to happen, but I know that it's truly a pile of kindling wood. But if someone is willing to care that much to restore it to being a usable building and for education, I'm really pleased. I don't know, did I start by saying this building and I are the same age?
I think you were going to.
I told you, but I didn't tell the camera. So, here's a confession. This building and I are equally old. It was finished in 1922, and I was completed in 1922. And so, I'm very fond of it for those early years, and for the fact that it was a very fine school in those days. And it would hurt to see it flattened, but now that I understand it's going to be moved sort of like a jigsaw puzzle to another place. The school, I used to go around saying sort of facetiously, well, this was from about 1990 on. My old school is dead, but I'm still going. Very funny. Now the old school will have a new life. There's no such chance for me.
My name is Mrs. Phyllis Thomas. I came to Morgan Hill in 1940 and taught at the Live Oak High School for 5 or 6 years. And following that, I married a longtime family person, the Thomases, George Thomas, and his family came to the Co-Park area and have a ranch, and they came in 1886. So I married into a family that was already established here a long, long time. And we had 3 children. We had a daughter, Patricia, and she started here as kindergarten and went through 6th grade. And after that time, they transferred to P.A. Walsh. It was going to be up by West Main Avenue. And then along came George Jr., and he was not allowed to be in kindergarten here because it was so overcrowded. And the young lady that you just saw outside the door, Elena Moreno, she was a teacher, and they had her teach in Madrone School, and that is where he went to kindergarten there. And his father had gone to all his schooling at Burnett School at that time, which is still standing there in Madrone area. And along came Kathy, and so the 2 children, the 2 girls and their brother were all students here at the high school, at the grammar school. I was involved in it at the time when my daughters were going to the kindergarten. I remember coming and helping in the kindergarten. There was a teacher by the name of Mrs. Just forgetting that name at the moment. But we'd help to bring refreshments while they took their morning rest in the kindergarten. So we didn't have a mother's club. Most of the mothers did come in the area and help out at the school, because at the time our children were going, it was starting to get very crowded here in Morgan Hill. So my other involvement of the school, which I know started in 1922, is that it seemed a shame not to keep this building, or at least a good part of it, because it's been the school of so many long-time Morgan Hill people around here. It touches the lives of many, many people that have been in Morgan Hill a long time. So we were with just a tiny bit of trying to save this building. One of the ladies coming on shortly, Gloria, that happens to be coming, and we tried really hard to do something about it. The school district then owned this building, and then they had it for their headquarters for a very short time, and then didn't keep it, so it went just vacant here all this time. And finally, we formed this little small group of people that wanted to save the building, or a good part, and we were in agreement that the area would be conducive to a community center. So the school was important because it was we had principals that stayed a long time, and at the time we started with our committee to save this building, we had a big open house here. We cleaned everything up and had open house. And across the street at the Catholic Parish Hall, the Lions Club was having their annual breakfast. So we had flyers that turned out. We had over 300 people come, and they were all walking around telling where their seat was, and it was a lot of Morgan Hill people that came, and there was a lot of interest. In fact, Gloria and I have the names of those people from our petition at that time. So it just has been a struggle in Morgan Hill, I have found, to really get enough help to save some of our buildings that represent history of the area. And that is what I thought. It was a shame to not good part of it here, that it would be very, very good. The principals that they had stayed a long time, and I remember when my oldest daughter was in the 6th grade here, that was when the traffic was still going up right through Morgan Hill here, and it was very hard for the teachers to teach because there was so much noise. And I remember that Patricia was in a class of 6th grade, or no, it was 5th grade, and it was such a huge class that she was an assistant teaching with helping the teacher teach the reading in that particular class. So I would say that it's nice to have this history remembered, because Morgan Hill at one time was part of the city, the Valley of Heart's Delight, and most of the early people that came here had orchards, and it was either prunes mostly or walnuts. So most of the families were out from in the area of as far as out in Paradise Valley and all around. So the school got very crowded, and they did build P.A. Walsh, which was named after one of the board members. And so that now it is hard for me to really accept that we haven't done a better job somehow of keeping parts of it that would be part of the public school history. And I know that the council, finally, we got them to buy this, and we thought maybe from then on we'd get something done about it, but that didn't take place, and it's gone to a private school. We'll have part of it. So I would say in closing that I, as a person coming here directly from Berkeley to teach at that time, and I've had a very full life, and most of it's really been full of education. And right now we're fighting to try to get our high school, which is terribly overcrowded, to get a selection made where it's going to be built. So I think that would be about it. That way, it's been a pleasure to help you gather the history. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, you look so pretty. You should go out to dinner.
Okay, that's nice that you girls are doing this.
Oh, thanks.
You know, when you think about our whole state, It was just at mid at night, and they
I'm just gonna look around and see what's going on.
So what was this room now?
Had to be my second grade classroom. First year was second grade. This was our first grade. First grade was over here.
He walks too fast, huh, Jerry?
It's okay, I'm gonna put the footage in as he's talking.
Yeah.
We'll put footage of him walking around.
This was kindergarten over here. Can we get inside there? That's kindergarten there. You got a key to that one?
I didn't bring it. It's the best in there, though.
Okay, let's go up there and see what we got there. So that was the kindergarten class there, and then you got first and second.
This whole section of that. How many students would you say that were here all at the same time?
God,
I mean, how many were in one class? There were 5.
my biggest thing is tetherball, playing tetherball.
Were you good?
It's come here early before school started to play tetherball.
Wow.
Okay. In between memories over here. Okay, let's go do it. George, you didn't ask the questions?
What?
You're gonna ask questions?
I have a list of things to jog your memory, and then if you stop talking, I'll start saying something.
Okay.
So was this an auditorium already when?
This was like a library, if I remember right.
Well, this used to be the auditorium, and that wall was broken through, and the whole thing. I mean, it didn't exist, but then later on they closed it off. So I don't know how it was when you were here.
Teacher's lounge.
Was it closed off when you were here? Did you have?
Remember your fourth grade?
I remember my first teacher real well. She's my favorite one. And she told me one time, I was a good girl.
My name is Alfred Philip Elciati, and I went to school here in 1954. I started kindergarten through fourth grade, and I have a lot of memories in the school. And just to give you a little background, I was born and raised in Morgan Hill. I graduated from high school here and also worked for the city of Morgan Hill here for 24 years. Just a little remembrance here at the school is that the east side of the building was for kindergarten, first, second grades, and the west side was for third grade and fourth grade. My memories include running up and down the hallways here, which they were very noisy, and we always got in trouble for making too much noise, and so we always had to walk real softly on that. One remembrance is our principal here was Mr. Ed Bollay, and he caught Bob Nishimura and myself playing keepsies in marbles. And in doing that, he said that was gambling back then, and that was second grade here then, and he took away all our marbles. And so that was really something for me that I still remember that. And I was so scared when I was in his office, taking away my marbles and everything, and saying, you guys are gambling, you can't do this at our school. So that was one thing I remember a lot here. Also, I graduated with a lot of kids here that we went all the way through high school. Jean Guillermo, Lydia Bondi, Mark Brunel, Chris Gozay, and Bob Nishimura, and there's a bunch of other ones I don't remember all the names on them, but they all went to school here. But that's my highlights of.
Who are some of your teachers?
Some of my teachers here were, Mrs. Thomas was my, it's not Phyllis Thomas, there's another Mrs. Thomas was our kindergarten teacher. There was, I gotta stop right now, I can't remember it right now. Let's see here. Okay.
So what did you say, this classroom, you mentioned that you knew what this classroom here was used for. This one here was what?
This one here was used for our 3rd and 4th grades classes, the one I'm in right here right now.
And were the classes very full in those days? Were there very many children in each classroom?
Best I can remember was there was probably 14 or 15 in each classroom. That's what I can remember. And then I remember, matter of fact, I do remember in this classroom here in 3rd grade, my teacher was John Atkins, and he was a real nice guy. I remember him because when I was small, he would feel like he was so tall. He was probably about 6'3", and just I can remember that in this room here with him.
What is your favorite memory?
My favorite memory? Well, we used to come here early in the mornings, and we used to have like a tetherball contest, and we used to get here like an hour before school and play tetherball, and everybody's hand from hitting the ball, because tetherball is on a pole with a chain on it, and everybody's hand was on this side was always either bruised or something like that because we used to play so much.
I understand that the yard used to look different than it does now. What did it look like?
Well, the yard had some basketball courts, and then there was 2 baseball fields that we played on, one on the east side and one on the west side. And I remember we had one of our first bicycle races here that I think the city of Morgan Hill sponsored this a long time ago and we used to have a race around the basketball courts, go all the way around the fence area and come back in. And I remember I came in 2nd place on that, and the guy who beat me was 2 years older than me. And I still remember that because he was older than I was.
Was Morgan Hill a lot different in those days than it is today, or what are some of the notable differences?
Well, Morgan Hill probably had a population probably of around 2,000 people when I was here in
That was
school.
what year?
That was 1954 I remember when I graduated from high school, we had a population of 4,000, and that was 1967.
And we have 33,000 today.
That's correct, yeah, 33,000 people.
It's quite a difference.
It is.
So you probably knew everybody in
Yes,
town.
we knew everybody in town. We had one shopping center, which was Nob Hill on Main Avenue, and everybody went there, and everybody knew each other there.
What kind of other activities, do they have plays here or other things going on in the school that would bring people here?
I don't remember any having plays.
Okay. Okay. So what do you think about the Morgan Hill School building being moved to Yawgis Hill for use as a private elementary school, the Cardinal Academy?
Well, that is better than demolishing the building because at least it'll keep its integrity of the school and a lot of memories that a lot of the older people that went to school here still be intact.
Okay.
I would have liked to have it stay here and that way, but that alternative there is still good enough that at least we retain the building.
Now, number one, we're the Guglielmo family. This is my mother, Madeline. I'm George.
I'm Gene.
Gene. We were, my brother and myself were actually raised all of our lives in Morgan Hill. And I guess I came to school here in 1953, and my mother came a little bit before that.
Yes, I came in early 30s, I can't remember. I graduated in the 8th grade in 38, so figure that out, 32, 33, I don't know. At that time, I attended the first, second, and third grades were held at the Grange Hall. And then they added on, and later on came 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th here. And eventually, when my son started, they had whole 8th grades here, did they?
No.
No, it was later.
We came in, I went kindergarten through 4th grade here. And then from here transferred up to, I think, P.A. Walsh was brand new at that time. Yeah, went to the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th at P.A. Walsh. There you go. Went to kindergarten here with Mrs. Thomas, which was an old fixture of Morgan Hill. Mrs. Thompson. Thomas.
Thomas, yeah.
I have it too.
Yeah, not Mrs. Phyllis Thomas, but this is Mrs. Thomas, another Thomas. Graduation, there was a formal graduation ceremony held from kindergarten into 1st grade. Little blue, remember that?
Cap and
Blue
gown.
little cap and gowns and performances. I think we sang "How Much Is This Dog in the Window" or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
we did the Davy Crockett. We had the raccoon hats.
But
So
memories
Davy
of-
Crockett.
Well, when I attended school here, it was very small. The classes were maybe 20, 25 at most in a class, and you almost knew all the students that were here.
What was the population then in Morgan Hill?
Oh, maybe 6,000?
Oh,
No.
no.
Not even?
No.
I
It was
really-
3,000 when we were in high school.
Oh, well, so it was.
And that
very-
was in what year? You said 50 something?
I think when I graduated high school, I voted in 65. I think the population in Morgan Hill was around 3,000 or 4,000. I'm not positive on that.
Well, it gives kind of a,
General
Idea.
feeling, but it was a situation just like she says, everybody knew everybody in town.
And all the streets, there were all ranches on the streets. As we walked home from school, from Diana, right here from the school to the end of Diana's where I live, and I live there now.
that's a long walk. How far is that?
Oh, I don't think it's as
We let
long.
her
We
drive.
thought it was long, probably not even about a mile and 3/4,
2 miles.
2 miles, about.
Yeah.
But it was part of the fun of going to school there, because you knew everyone. Walking home was fun.
What's one of your favorite memories, Mrs. Guglielmo?
What
In the school, what do you know, what comes to mind?
Oh, I can't think of it. Oh, I don't know, we were all involved in all the sports and things, and we enjoyed that, and you knew everyone, and it was fun.
Any teachers, special teachers?
Oh, I had a lot of
Special
nice
friends?
teachers. There was Mrs. Ritchie that I liked, Mrs. Allward. Did you have her? Mr. Rice, who was my 7th grade teacher, and then he also became principal later. I had him in 6th and 7th grades, because he moved from 6th to 7th, so I had him for 2 years.
Just to be with you?
Yes.
Mr. Rice was principal when I first started school here, and then Mr. Blake came in, and Edwin Blake became principal here. Some of the memories I have, I mean, there used to be a big incinerator in the middle of the ground out there, in the middle of the playground, and we used to collect all the milk. Kindergarten, we always had milk and graham crackers, and then there was the thing where you collected them all and you dumped them into the incinerator. That was the duty of somebody, I don't remember. I did it a couple times, I'm sure, but then they burned the milk cartons. Back in those days, it was out there. But I can remember the steam trains going by, the locomotives, changing tracks, bringing in lumber and hauling. I don't know what else they hauled out of Morgan Hill, but there was a switch track that came across Depot Avenue. And so there was a lot of train motion out that way. Just some of the memories. The corner back here in the west corner, you have the marble area where we played marbles, bowlsies and cubesies and all that. That was, I guess it was forever the marble area. Then you had dodgeball and then the big playground where you ran around like cowboys and Indians. Yeah. So those are some of the.
Well, Jean, you'll remember your kindergarten class. Do you remember what happened to you in kindergarten?
Unfortunately, I had a little accident while we were during recess. It was kind of a rainy day, and everybody was running kind of under the cover playing cowboys and Indians. And there was only one person left in the class. And he decided to walk out, and at that time they didn't have safety glass. It was just regular glass. So he just opened the door. I just happened to be running by, and my head went through the glass and
That's what
cut
else
my nose. Pretty bad. It scared everybody. I wasn't scared till everybody else started screaming, pointing at me.
You don't forget those kind of memories.
No.
Your mother's don't either.
No.
No, he was good for that. Dr. Carrot called him Stitch Galileo. He's always having stitches.
No.
But it
I
sounds like
survived.
many
I
happy
survived.
memories. You had happy
Oh, yeah,
memories too.
That was a big, and friendships, and this was a big thing. And coming, being raised out in the ranch and coming in and seeing all your friends and making new friends, and playing volleyball or tetherball, and the different marbles and tops and
You know, it sounds like kids were more easily satisfied then because, you know, you hear today that everybody, I'm bored, it's boring in Morgan Hill. There's nothing to do in Morgan Hill. Well, I don't hear anybody here saying in this age, you know, this generation,
You did other things.
about how
You
boring
found
it was
things-
then.
You found things to occupy yourself. When you got home, you had things to do.
if you didn't, then you'd end up being put to work. There's always someone
You
who
always
actually
had that.
stay busy.
The nice thing about it, at that time, it was a small town, and there's still a lot of the old timers that are still here. That I went to a live old class reunion about a month ago, and so a lot of the kids I hadn't seen since I was in this school. It was really fun.
Think about like growing up, you say there's nothing to do. Well, there wasn't. They didn't open a pizza place in Morgan Hill until what, about 1964 or 60s. So when we were here, there was no fast food. Well, of course you have to drive in and you have an orange freeze and little tiny places, but those were.
What was the pizza place?
The first one was down the other end of town. I opened up when I was in high school. Rapids, I think was the name of it, down where Trail Dust is right now. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that was frozen pizza or something.
Oh,
I made dough and all that
I
stuff.
don't remember, no.
Had to go to San Jose to get a good pizza. I remember that.
And we were coming through the school, and I said, yeah, this is where I had first grade, second grade, third grade,
Yeah, 'cause
fourth
his
grade.
kids went-
And it still said she still was teaching in that same classroom when my daughter came. Wow. Unbelievable.
That is. Yeah, then we
Still
went to
had
Big
it right
Burnett,
under the
remember?
desk.
Remember then we went to Burnett?
Burnett?
The new school.
Brand new one, yeah.
I remember running around here, this was a big, we thought it was a big giant campus,
Yeah, you always think it was much bigger than what it is.
especially when you're half the size.
Yeah, I had to sit on that bench a lot of times. That was the discipline.
The old kindergarten over there, one room kindergarten. Had our own little play area.
Blankets?
Yeah. This one, Jose was bigger than the teacher. Remember that? Oh, God.
You guys gonna do it? See how you guys do it.
Well, you're already done?
Yeah, good.
Well, I wanted to be here so you couldn't lie about me. What did he?
You know, they didn't have kindergarten when I went here. That was added on later.
That's it.
Yeah, we had, first grade was there, the rest of them was there, still there. First, second, third, fourth, all these classes were in it, and six was right here.
Did they add on, did they build it all at one time, or did they add on a section?
Yeah, no, actually, I went to the.
Must have had that one there.
Both of these
They
were
added-
add-ons, both sides were add-ons.
These both sides, yes, because I went to second and third grade at the old Grange Hall.
Well, that's where I went.
Then they-
One year, we went to Grange Hall.
One year there.
We used to,
They still have it there.
the trains would change. I remember the steam trains out here. They'd come in and change tracks underneath the big oak tree and you know, the steam and, yeah.
Well, Mrs. Thomas,
There sure
we
was
went out
no-
there on a field trip. Walked up by the
Yeah, we
tracks.
went underneath the oak tree, took the acorns out of one of the
The
three
whole-
big ones here. Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
we had a
together.
hobo camp there. We used to. Do you remember the hobo camp under the big oak tree
No,
there?
We thought it was a big-
Not your day, not our day.
Hobo camp,
I
that's,
remember.
We used to
I
walk.
used to call that home. What are you talking about?
I lived on Diana Avenue. You know where I live now? I used to walk to school from here, go back home. Not like now.
In the snow, it snowed then.
No, it just.
It was uphill
But
both
we had
ways.
fun. The roads weren't paved. We played hopscotch and played hopscotch all the way. All the kids, we do everything.
Was this before you were a Gulielmo?
Oh, yes,
yes.
yes.
I was gonna say, it's a long way from the winery.
When we walked the.
Well, no, it's the same.
No, no,
I'm
no.
still
Just
up on.
Diana.
Oh, on the other, she was on the other
of
side.
that.
Oh, I thought she was on this side, and that's not that.
No,
No, she actually walked by the vineyard to go up to the.
Oh.
She was a little further east, but on Diana, on the winery. So, yeah, they used to walk. We used to walk it once in a while.
We used to ride our bikes.
We didn't have
bikes.
buses then for the kids. They had a high school bus, but not for the grammar school kids.
Used to ride our bikes in and don't even lock them up. No locks on them or nothing.
Lots.
Well, we're locked.
We never
didn't
locked the house. Never locked the house.
Never took the keys
Keys
out of
were in the car all the time.
I mean,
Until
if
they
you
built a
didn't,
high
you could
school
sneak
over
'em
there.
out.
When they built a high school over there, things changed real fast.
That road. The red tile road.
What about the medallions over there?
In the medallions. The fascias on the gables. The woodworking. gutter areas. I just found that out.
That's an addition. See, this was the original. Didn't they do the additions? I mean, Weeks did what I read in this Weeks book.
The original building as it went inside.
Yeah.
The wings and the back.
Yes, according to these two things were part of the Weeks. The original building with the two entrances. See what this here, this is. I'm still upset with the can you tell? Yes, I wrote about 5 letters to the city. Good afternoon, I'm Beth Wyman. I lived in Morgan Hill for 21 years and I'm still very fond of it even though I'm not a resident anymore. I was a past president of the Historical Society, I was on the City Council, I've written a book called Hiram Morgan Hill, which was published in 1980 and 1990, second edition. I'm very interested in the history of Santa Clara County. I teach a class at San Jose State in historic preservation, and I'm very involved in most of the preservation issues in the county. I've been following this, the fate of the Morgan Hill Grammar School with great interest, especially because of Gloria.
And I'm Gloria Pariseau, current president of the Morgan Hill Historical Society, and preserving the Morgan Hill School building has been a personal effort of mine for about the last 10 years. It's been very important, not just to the society, but to other peoples that I've participated with over the last few years to make sure that this building was saved and preserved for future generations. Beth, you were also on the Heritage Commission for Santa Clara County.
I was, yes.
For a number of years.
The Heritage Commission was interested in all of the preservation issues in the county, so we were involved with this one. And I am particularly interested in the history of the grammar schools in Morgan Hill. The first school was built in 1894 on the site that is next to what is now the Grange building. And it was a very ornate Victorian-style building, but Morgan Hill was recruiting people through the Southern Pacific Railroad to come and buy lots in Morgan Hill and become farmers and become rich and famous, of course. And lots of people were moving here, and it became overcrowded very soon. So they had to build a second school, which is now the Grange Building. That was the second grammar school. And it was a completely different style, not Victorian at all. And then that one became overcrowded, so they hired a real architect, William H. Weeks, who is quite famous in California for having built lots and lots of school buildings and public library buildings and other public buildings, as well as the De Anza Hotel in San Jose and the Medical Dental Building in San Jose. So he was a very versatile architect. He built this building in 1922, and then he came back in 1934 and designed he didn't build it, he designed it, designed the additions to the school. So the architecture is Spanish colonial mission revival with all of the arches and ornamentation and red tile roof, those kinds of things that are typical of that style, and were very popular in the 20s as a style in California.
And into the 30s, the early 30s.
The 30s, of course. William H. Weeks was at that time living in Watsonville, and he called himself the architect of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. He was best known for his innovative designs of school buildings, especially in the 1920s and 30s. And in 1924, he took his son in, so the William H. Weeks architect became Weeks and Weeks, and the two of them built a lot of buildings.
It was also noted in some of the earlier newspaper accounts of Mr. Weeks that his buildings, the design standards that he used for his buildings were the design standards that were actually the springboard for the state for the state building codes. His engineering and design standards were the standards that were used for public buildings throughout the state of California. They became a part of the code book. And Mr. Weeks was consulted with on many occasions for his design standards and engineering techniques that were included and incorporated into the code books that some are still in place today. So he was an architect and a master builder who was leaps ahead of anyone else and substantially ahead of his own time.
You also talk in the past about how well constructed this particular building is and the quality of materials that were used to go into it, like the floors, for example. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Actually, the city of Morgan Hill, or the Morgan Hill area, in 1984, we experienced in this area a substantial earthquake.
6.1.
Yes, and there was a lot of damage. In fact, there was so much damage to some of the buildings in the downtown area that some of those buildings actually had to be demolished. And I think it's paramount to note that the children that were housed in this school, because it was an operating school during that event, that the kids all went back to school the very next day after the earthquake into this structure. We also suffered a severe earthquake, or the Loma Prieta earthquake, in 1989. Which again wreaked substantial damage throughout the South County area. And one of the things that's interesting when you walk through this building, if you really look at the plastered walls, we are lap and plaster here, and you go through the building and really look at it, you'll note that there's very few cracks and there's very few things that are falling apart in this building, other than it's just old and hasn't been maintained for a number of years. But if you go through and actually look at the plaster walls, you won't see a lot of cracking and damage. And the cracking and damage and holes that you've seen are man-made. And it was man-made during a time when people have come in here doing explorations of the building to see what we have. So I think that in itself attests to the stability of this particular structure. This building is made out of Douglas fir. It's a wood frame, one-story building with a low-rise roof, and I've personally been up in the roof structure, and there's enough material up there to float a battleship. I mean, this building is very well built. I have not personally been under this building, but some of the workmen that have been under this building have reported back to me that we actually have a building that's still sitting on a very sound floor joist. So, as far as the building structurally goes, I think we're still looking at a very sound, well put together building.
So as you know, that we're going to be moving the building shortly. With that construction one, how will that move take place? What will be needed to move this, what is it, 17,000 square feet, 18,000 square foot building?
Well, we're actually looking at about 16,800 square feet of building. And this building, because of the way it's designed and put together, will actually be severed or cut into 8 pieces. The 2 wings that you see on either side of the building are going to be divided into 2 pieces. Each wing will be cut into 2 pieces, which is 4. In the center section of the building, which contains or houses the old auditorium that we hope to bring back and restore, or the 2-story section will be cut into 4 segments for relocation. And there's also some discussion going through with the developers that are proposing the move to remove a portion of the roof structure on the center section of the building so that we can get the whole building underneath the wires along Monterey Road, so that we don't have to cut everybody's power down for 8 or 10 hours during the move. So that's still being discussed between ourselves, the developers, and the moving company. And we're looking at about having to remove about 4 feet of the ridge section of the building. But because the building and the timbers that are contained in that structure now are in such good shape, they're the same timbers that we can use to rebuild once we move the building. So we're looking at a minimum of 8 pieces, probably 9, and a 24-hour time frame of moving.
Which should be a piece of cake, because in January, the city of San Jose moved a 5,000-ton
Yes.
building that was, how many stories was that?
4? No, I'm sorry. I'm
It's
thinking of a
at
different
least
one.
4 and maybe 5-story building, and they moved it 280 feet back. Moving a building, a historic building, is never the preference for historic preservationists, but it is an alternative that is better than
Demolition.
death.
Here, here, we agree to that.
This building was, I might just add one little thing about the Weeks, and then we'll go into something else, but Mr. Weeks' designs were very different, just as in the same way that Frank Lloyd Wright was different from the Victorian era of little tiny rooms and little tiny closets and very dark and lots of stuff inside, to very open and environmental in the sense that they harmonized with the natural surroundings.
Right. I think one of the things that you would note in this building is part of that old craftsman design for ventilation purposes and bringing light into the central hallways. These areas up that you see up here that are 4x4 that have been closed in, of course, over time, those are actually windows. Those actually used to be windows that opened. They're sort of like transom windows. And the reason we had those big windows here that opened, and we had these big windows here that opened, and that allowed the filtration of the air and light to pass from the outside into this room and then on into the hallway, so they were really efficient to operate.
It was the early air conditioning system.
Yes. And light transfer. It was very important because, you have long, corridors, and rather than keeping lighting running through these corridors, artificial lighting, they would try to use as much natural lighting as they could. And obviously the hallways in this building didn't have any exterior light sources. So what he had done is he placed these windows, and if you go through the building, you'll see that these are in every single room. Every single room that was considered a classroom. And it was so that they could transfer the light from the buildings that were brought in from the beautiful, huge windows, would pass that light on into the corridors. So he was an environmental genius.
Early environmental.
Yes.
Did either of you, I don't recall, mention the years during which the school was in operation?
Well, it opened in 1923, I guess, because they were building in 1922. And closed in 1988.
Yes. So, and it was actually the longest, the oldest operating school I think it's Santa Clara County.
It surely
Or is
might
it
be.
it might have even been Northern California. I know it had one of those designations. I'll look it up and find out. But it had been in constant operation for over 75 years, which is a long time.
When I was working with the Morgan Hill Historical Society, a lot of people really were, this was very fond, you know, they didn't want to see it moved from this corner. This is a landmark corner. They felt that there were lots of memories and lots of,
We also had very specific zoning in place for this property to make sure that the building would not be, when the
Right.
downtown plan was developed back in
That's
the
right.
mid-'80s.
We had
early 80s.
community meetings to say,
Yes.
what do you like about Morgan Hill? What don't you like about Morgan Hill? And this was number one.
Yes. And so they actually incorporated into the city
General
ordinances and the general plan was a protectionary issue for this particular building, for this particular site. And it was that the building could always be here for something. And obviously, as time changes, attitudes change, so, which was unfortunate, but fortunate.
Would you like to make any remarks about how you feel? I think it's relatively evident, but you know, some summary remarks about the moving and how you feel about that.
Personally, I feel that, personally, as president of the Historical Society and actually being involved with this particular building and property for the number of years that I have, it would be my preference and my desire to see the building stay right here and to be preserved and renovated and redeveloped at this location. That not being the case, that not being the general trend, then to me, moving the building to another centrally located area within the city is a preferable alternative to demolition of this particular structure. Absolutely.
And I agree with that.
So, like Beth has said, demolition is better, relocation is better than death. And I agree. So, and with that said, you know, we've done everything that we can to make sure that the building does get moved and relocated and becomes back into something that this community can be proud of and fond of.
Well, it's going to be a school.
Yes,
So
that's what's exciting. That's
what's
what's the
a
exciting part.
a
yeah.
happy future. Right.
Yes.
When I lived here, my children were not going to this school. We lived out in Yagas Valley, so they went to different schools. And in the 70s, I believe, I was a substitute teacher here for a short time and got to be the permanent substitute for the kindergarten, which was a double kindergarten, morning kindergarten and afternoon kindergarten. And the two groups met in the middle at a lunchtime period and had a sort of a little 30 kids in both classes, a little 60 student group activity, which usually was a song and a story and maybe eating something that they had cooked in the morning, that kind of thing. As the spare person, you know, the permanent substitute for that group, one of my most memorable recollections was when all of the regular teachers had a meeting and they left me with the 60 kids for half an hour. It was pretty scary because actually my main job was taking care of one of the students who was pretty out of control and needed one-on-one, and I was with him at recess, I was with him in the classroom, I was always hanging on to him. And so here I was hanging on to him and trying to lead 59 other students in singing and some kind of group activity. So I remember that pretty well.
Both of my children, I have 2 children, and both of my children did attend Morgan Hill School through the 5th and 6th grades, and then went on to Martin Murphy up in San Jose, and then of course came back and attended the Live Oak High School. Most of our memories of the Morgan Hill School are good.
Mm-hmm. Definitely good. It was a good kindergarten.
Yes.
Just that one day.
But my children, both Sean and Jenny, they both have very fond memories of the Morgan Hill School. And they also have some not so fond memories of being reprimanded or corrected for things they shouldn't have been doing. And I remember a time
Were they in
when they
kindergarten?
when
I don't
they used
think
to
so.
have, they used
I
to
don't
turn the
think
big sprinklers on out in the playfield in the back, and my son did fine. He was a little more easily to behave himself, and Jenny, of course, is the younger and had a little bit more problem. But I got called in one day because Jenny had been told on several occasions to stay out of the sprinklers. And they turned the sprinklers on, and she didn't stay out of the sprinklers. So I had to come that day, and she had been told that if she did it again, they were going to call her mom. So I had to come down to school that day, and she was a bad girl because she had been running in the sprinklers on the playground. Unfortunately, 2 of her friends had done the same thing, and I got stuck with all 3 of these little girls and had to take them home.
Oh, well.
But they didn't run in the sprinklers anymore.
Those are parent stories that everybody has a parent story, right?
Just that I'm very happy that the city is working together with the developers to move the building, and that there seems to be a real dedication and buy-in from not only the city and the developers. So it just makes me feel very good and very positive about what we're attempting to do.
And I would say the same thing, that it's a happy ending to
Yes.
a long story of sort of being back and forth and up and down and not having any security for its
Yeah.
future. So I'm very happy that it's going to be moved.
We're going to have a good conclusion.
My name is Paul Rice, and I'm here to speak about the Morgan Hill School, elementary school. I had 4 relatives that taught here at Morgan Hill School. My grandmother, Muriel Allen, taught in the 30s, and this is a picture of her when she was in her 90s, I believe. My father, Robert Rice, was principal. He taught here as a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teacher in the 30s. This probably was taken in the early 50s. My dad likes to joke that he met his mother-in-law before he picked his mother-in-law before he met his wife. So anyway, they taught in the 30s, and then Dad became principal prior to World War II, and then had to go out to the war himself and returned, of course. And the other relatives who taught here, my mother Jean, briefly in the late 60s and early 70s, she taught, I believe it was 6th grade. And my aunt Eliza Rice also taught here in the 50s, and I think maybe the 40s. So there's that family connection. I was a student here. I entered 1st grade in 1954. My sister, Robin Gwynn, who lives in Oregon now, she attended from 1949 to 1953. And I have some of her thoughts written down I'd like to share. And let me read this. She remembers that Dad was very artistic and loved doing the hall bulletins. He wanted to welcome the children and teachers back to school with some nice artwork. I remember him specifically designing cartoon characters for the hallway when the school had their carnival here. He would cut out full human-sized characters of Bugs Bunny and Sylvester and Tweety and those characters. And I remember Here, Elmer Fudd was his favorite. He had him pointing the way to the Westinghouse. It was for people who were a little tired of doing the cakewalk, I suppose. My sister Robin and I both agree that this school just had the best teachers, the best faculty, secretaries, custodians, and my father was quite proud of that fact. And some of those, I could name some of those teachers. My teacher in first grade was Mrs. Myers. In second grade, Dorothy Clauser. And third grade, probably my favorite was Virginia Cleveland. She was quite an artist herself. And Robin recalls Evelyn Wicker and Margaret Culp, Lonnie Thomas, Clarence Shirley, Ruby Wardlow. I'm not sure if Belle McCormick taught here or not, but she was also a very good teacher. The secretaries, when I was here, Virginia Reed was my father's secretary, and later Lagina Metcalf. The custodian, I believe, was Sam Moore. He was a fun guy, and the school nurse, of course, was Ruth Shelton. And nobody could forget, but we have forgotten his name, the crossing guard outside, since there was no stoplights at Dunn Avenue at the time.
I have a lot of memories of Morgan Hill School, not only as a school nurse, but also as a parent. Can you hear me?
A little bit louder.
My 4 children attended school here, and so I was here. I spent a lot of time in the school as a parent, and then in later years as a school nurse. I think it was in the 60s that I was doing school nursing for 10 years. I well remember the day, a hot summer day, Robert Rice came to he was principal and superintendent of the school district, and he came to my home, and he told me that the evening before, the school board had authorized him to hire a school nurse for 2 mornings a week, and he wanted me to take the position. At the time, I was full-time mother and chicken raiser, so I said, well, I'll have to think about it a little bit. So in a few days, I went back and I said, I'd like to try to do that. I had no training in that, so I attended San Jose State and took many classes in school nursing. So I did it for 10 years, and during that time, the school unified, and so that added school to high school and also Ensenada School and San Martin. So my time was so cut up into such short periods of time that I didn't feel like I was accomplishing what I wanted to do. So then I let somebody else do it. One of the prettiest things that I remember about this school is when my daughter was in Campfire Girls, they danced the maypole dance out in front of the school. They used the flagpole, and they had the ribbons, and the little girls darting in and out. It was a very beautiful sight. They did that for several years, and it was very, very pretty to watch. Now, the most distressing experience that I had was when there was a little second or third grader boy broke his arm one day at school on the playground, and we had no permission for him to have treatment by a doctor. And his parents were rope rockers, and he had no idea where they were working that day. So he had to wait till late in the evening before his parents got home before he could be treated. That was sort of hard to handle. after that, the years just rolled by, and we had regular school programs. Each year, they would add another day to my time until I was working full-time. And it just seems like the years went by, and first thing we knew, we had this great big school district. After they unified, it was quite a large district. But the thing is about Morgan Hill, the personnel from the school made up a large part of the population of the city. We had, in our health programs, we had immunizations, we had vision and hearing testing of certain grades, and then just the regular health problems, emergency care. Let's see.
Bee stings. I say bee stings. That was one of your other jobs. Bee stings.
Oh, bee stings, yes. Yes, a lot of bee stings. No, I think those are, I always enjoyed coming to Morgan Hill to work, Morgan Hill School to work. The teachers were very congenial, and they were a lot of Morgan Hill residents. And they all got along very well. And Mr. Rice was principal, and Virginia Reed was the secretary. And we all had a lot of respect and admiration for each other. And it was very delightful to work.
Were kids afraid to come to you? Were they afraid that you were going to do hurtful things to them when they came into you? Or were they happy to see you, the kids?
No, they...
You know, like when you go to a doctor, sometimes you're afraid to go to a doctor.
No, they were never afraid. I was, with having my own children in the school, they sort of knew me and knew my family. So there was never any fear on the part of the children. And I can remember the first day of school, how nice it was to come here. The hallways were always newly waxed, newly oiled, and everything was painted, and the school looked beautiful. Every year it looked like a new building. Daughter, Pat Shelton Bennett, she went to school here as, 6 years?
Only through third grade. I started here in 1947 with Mrs. Thomas, and then we had Mrs. Tanasha, Mrs. Moreno, Mrs. Dye, and then we went to P.A. Walsh after that. Some of my memories, we talk about Mr. Rice. One time we had a substitute when Mrs. Moreno had her twins, and our substitute sang opera, and some of the students were laughing, and Mr. Rice didn't wait for his paddle. He one boy, and then that one boy got spanked, and we all just really straightened up fast. But when we had Mrs. Thomas in kindergarten, we used to take the train from here to Gilroy, and then the bus would pick us up and bring us back. A lot of good memories.
Who were some of your friends?
Bonnie Payne, before Mom was the school nurse, before they had the school nurse, when you would get sick, you got to take a friend to the auditorium, and there was a cot in there, and so you had a friend to sit with you. So Bonnie Payne and I, about every other Friday, would decide that it was time. Bonnie Payne is now the secretary at the Live Oak High School. I think she's head secretary. So she and I would take turns getting sick, and then the other one got to sit with us. And then like one memory with Ellen Moreno as my second grade teacher, when it was your birthday, she'd draw a cake on the board, and you got to use the colored chalks all day to decorate your cake. And again, you got to pick a friend, and it usually took a good part of the day to color in your cake. But a lot of good memories here.
Were you a good student?
Average. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed school. I really did. And then I think because the town was so small, you knew everybody. And I still have friends that I have gone through kindergarten all the way through, even through high school, and we still keep in touch. Luella Rosso, Anita Ferris, Bonnie Payne, Cherry, just different ones, and then of course some of the boys also.
Is that the Rosso from the furniture store?
No, they were prune ranchers.
At that time, that's what mostly everybody did around here, was prune ranching, and then a little bit later, they went to walnut ranching.
So Morgan Hill was a different kind of place then?
Absolutely. We had one department store. We worked on, we had prunes, so we had prune pickers that would pick. But our big thing was when the truck would come into town, we got to come in and we'd hit all the stores, the Miss Gus's variety store, the department store, the donut store, everything, because we weren't used to this. And we would have, like we were out in the country, so when we would come to town, we'd bring our skates or bikes. It was a real treat to be with people, because then we could ride on sidewalks. We didn't have those in the country, and we still don't.
Tell about you and Bonnie playing jacks.
Oh, we used to play in the corridor out here. It was so nice. The girls would sit and we played a lot of jacks and on all the different games, not just, you'd put them in the pig in the barn and the different ones, not just throwing up and catching the ball. It was quite a thing. One time when I was in second grade, I was with Mrs. Moreno, and my brother was younger, Bill, and he was going to go with Glenn Moreno after school, and I was invited to go during the day. So I called my mother, and she said I could go, because she wasn't here at the school at that time. And she said I could go, and so I walked in like all kids do, the whole class walking in, I can go, and of course, didn't mean anything to her. So after school, I got myself crossed over here with Officer Roy, like Paul Rice was saying, his name was Officer Roy, crossed the street. You have to remember, no traffic lights in Morgan Hill. And this was the main way to LA. Everybody went through Morgan Hill.
This was 101.
101. And then I walked all the way to their house. Well, then in the meantime, they started looking for me. My father was the bus driver, and everyone, he missed me on his route. So he's looking for me, comes in and talks to Mrs. Moreno. She doesn't know where I am because she didn't hear me. And then her husband was the chief of police, and so I walked all the way up there. I don't know where the boys were. They were probably waiting for a ride with her, because it's quite a ways. And then here I'm sitting on their porch waiting for them, and here comes the chief of police looking for me. So, a lot of good memories, A small town is great.
This district became a unified district in 1966. Before that, there were 5 separate districts: the Morgan Hill Burnett District, San Martin, Machado, Encinal, and Live Oak High School District. The Live Oak High School District at that time had the same boundaries as the Morgan Hill Unified School District does now, 296 square miles. So there isn't anything new about a school district that extends over a much larger area than the city of Morgan Hill. This was when Morgan Hill Unified School District started in 1966. This was one of the schools that accommodated elementary students. And this was I was assistant superintendent for curriculum and personnel. And in that capacity, this was one of the schools that I was responsible for. There were some of the teachers who were here. I'm ashamed to say that I have forgotten their names, but others I do remember. I think perhaps the one that I remember most vividly is Lagina Metcalf. And by my count, there were at least 7 administrators went through this school at the time that Lagina was secretary. And I used to tell her that she was by far the best trainer of administrators that the school district had. And she never denied it. Some of the other people I remember, of course, are Gene and Bob Rice. Gene is a teacher and Bob is a principal. I knew Elena Moreno, and she is still, of course, in town. I knew John, I knew Lucille Tanasha, and Lucille went from here to Nordstrom. And of course I knew Ed Blay very well, and Ed started here. I moved to Morgan Hill in 1968, and at the best of my memory at that time, Morgan Hill was about 6,000, and it was in a state of transition from being the center of a farming community to being a bedroom community. And now there's only just a hint of farming, but there's lots of bedroom. When the school district was, or shortly after, was unified in 1967, we had the first of 5 bond elections, and we failed 5 bond elections in a row, starting in 1967. The first one we lost. The definition of passing a bond election is 2/3. We lost the first one by 23 votes. We never had less than a majority, but the majority kept going down. And the fifth one was something like 55%. And during this period, there were more and more classes that went on double session. In Morgan Hill at that time, at the worst, we had 4 classes in what was the auditorium. It was an auditorium, but there were 4 classrooms with visual barriers, but not sound barriers. This was also the scene of the beginnings of an outstanding kindergarten program was here. There was one kindergarten teacher who was a grown-up. The other kindergarten teachers were in their 20s, 23, 24, and I used to refer to that group as Aunt Betty and her kitty corps. But they all chose to be specialists. They taught all day long. In the morning, the afternoon people would act as assistants, and in the afternoon, the morning people acted as assistants. I don't know if I'm the only person at Morgan Hill, I doubt it, but there are probably others. This building should not be standing today. In 1947, there was an inspection of this building, and it did not meet the Field Act. In other words, it was not earthquake-proof. Most school buildings at that time that did not meet earthquake requirements were torn down. This one, they stuck a couple of steel rods through the roof. There are big metal plates on that side and on this side, held on by bolts. So a building that should have been destroyed wasn't, and now it's still standing. The other thing I remember about the building is the heating system. It was always going off and going on, and Robert Rice used to say that his best solution to the radiators was to kick them.
Was your office housed here as well? Were you in this building or in another room?
No, the district office was on the corner, the first district office was on the corner of 2nd and Monterey, upstairs. And however, since we didn't have enough office space, this was the site of the person who was in charge of special education and truancy. Al Mendizábal's office was here in the corner.
I'm Ethel Telfer. I've lived in Morgan Hill. I came here when I was 6 months old, and today I'm 81. I currently have a broken hip with pins, and I'm quite incapacitated, but I still get around. My father-in-law was mayor of Morgan Hill for many, many years. I guess he could be blamed for a lot of the things that weren't done, and really praised for things that were done. But I went to school for the first 4 years in the old Grange Hall, which I guess is still standing, and I hope Morgan Hill will preserve it. And then I attended this building for the next 4 years. And my memories, I lived on 2nd Street with my mother and 5 children. My father had died when I was 6 years old. The school felt always cold. So it was my reason. In fact, I smiled when Mr. Keg mentioned the trouble with the heat, because I never felt warm in this school. It was the only thing I can criticize about it. The teachers made up for the warmth that was lacking. But it was just cold all the time. We wore long, you're both too young to remember, but most of us wore long black bloomers down to our knees, and I guess they didn't have long underwear at that time, I don't know.
What year was that?
When I went to school here, we had to wear long black stockings and long bloomers, we called them, down to our knees, and probably if you talk to your grandmothers or whatever, they would prefer that. But I loved the school, I loved the teachers. We had teachers like Muriel Allen, and I noticed Robert Rice's name was mentioned again, and they just made up for the coldness of the school, actually, but it was cold. I can see that it has the lather, which the laths, and those are all hand-laid, but it's lacking insulation, what we call insulation today, and it was cold. But I feel that I had a very good education in the Morgan Hill School District. I have 3 children that were born and raised in this area and went through Morgan Hill schools. They're all college material, and in fact, my daughter even was honored and chosen for the White House Air Force One with President Nixon. At that time, he was in good political hands, and we won't go into that, but she was chosen to ride on his airplane and got to go all to the different countries and be on the plane when they picked him up when they picked the astronauts up in the airplane. Well, hi, this is my son. This is John Telfer, my son. He comes from used to be a political family. I think his grandfather, who was mayor of Morgan Hill for how many years? 16 years. And in fact, he was hit by a car where 2nd Street crosses Monterey, and thrown about 30 feet. And he was hit by a 17-year-old high school boy that had his attention diverted at the time. But he died 3 days later. But the people in Morgan Hill thought so much of him that they really marched on Sacramento within a few days, and that his death contributed to the first stoplight Morgan Hill had on 2nd Street, 2nd and Monterey. That might be an interesting note. But John has never taken up politics, but his grandfather was very much alive in it.